Hunger is universal. It knows no special group. It affects the old, the middle-aged, the young. It impacts people of all races, of all religions, and so it's very universal. There is no one who is immune to the type of hunger. And it really depends. If you're going to be in a city like Richmond in particular, which is primarily what we're going to talk about, the Richmond metro area, hunger is going to be probably in a city like Richmond is going to be, the numbers are going to be skewed to very high on the end of folks who are African American and Hispanic being hunger. But if we go out to Southside Virginia, you're going to probably see it different in that you're going to see a higher group of white people who are, or Caucasian, who are going to be hungry. So it really depends on where you go and what type of environment is, but there's just, it doesn't miss anybody. There's no prejudice with hunger. It impacts all people. And you know, when I think about talking about hunger and I think about reading the Bible, whether it's the Old Testament or the New Testament, hospitality or food is, you know, kind of a, there's hardly a page you can turn that doesn't talk about the importance of hospitality or feeding my sheep, or I can think of 20 things that John spoke of this morning in the 9 o'clock service, whether it was the Lord's Prayer, you know, give us our daily bread, or whether love your neighbor as yourself. There are so many references to, you know, the importance, the absolute urgency and importance of hospitality one to another and to feeding my sheep, whether it means feeding them spiritually or feeding them, you know, with actual food. We think of the, you know, the feeding the 5,000. There's just so many references to that. So it's kind of a age-old topic that doesn't go away, and it doesn't matter where you are. And you know, sometimes people ask me, well, what's the difference between like hunger in a third world country? Well, hunger in a third world country is very obvious. You know, children have very distended bellies, their eyes protrude, there's skin stretched over skeletons. And yet, in our area, you know, what's the difference? Why is it so important to feed hungry people here? And you know, it's much better hidden here. You know, I think about, you know, the person who may live next to you who is a senior citizen who retired, has a nice small retirement, a little Social Security, but then they have an illness that requires a very expensive medicine that costs a couple $1,000s a month. And suddenly everything that they have is going to that. And so, you know, food is the one thing. You can't not pay your rent payment or your mortgage. You can't not pay, you know, your insurance if you're fortunate enough to have it, which, as we heard from Sally Graham, that there's lots of people who don't have it. So there are certain things, utilities, you have to pay to be able to survive. And food is the one thing that people tend to kind of to leave out. Well, there's a couple of books I'd like to recommend if you haven't read them, because you know, I think the important thing of understanding the impact of going without food, it has a very profound impact mentally as well as physically. I don't know how many of you are familiar with a young woman who lives in New York City. Her name is Jeanette Walls, and she wrote just a real a book that's kind of gut-wrenching called The Glass Castle. And in it, she talks about growing up in a family where feeding the children was not a priority amongst things. And a lot of it had to do with her mother's mental illness. But I think, you know, that's a great book to read. Here's somebody who's highly successful and lives in Park Avenue, has a chauffeur-driven vehicle, but still to this day, I had the opportunity to meet her at a national conference, talks about the impact of going without food day in and day out, and how it has physically impacted her, that to this day she has all kinds of health issues that are related to that. There's another young woman who wrote a brilliant book called Homeless to Harvard. And there was a movie that they made, probably about a year ago that came out. And she wrote a book about how, you know, the teacher would want her, you're so bright, we want you to learn. And she said, you know, please, do they have a clue what it's like when your stomach is aching and you're in pain and your head is aching and you're trying to think where you're going to get that next crumb? That really trigonometry or Spanish just doesn't seem that important. So that's a really good one. I brought some materials with me, and one of the things that I brought with me was a copy of our latest newsletter, and it has David Baldacci, who's a wonderful, if you love mysteries and spy stories, which I do, great stories. But in it, he talks about he's doing things to help to feed people spiritually and through their brains by donating books. But he understands the importance of hunger because he says his mother grew up very hungry and talked about what that is. So it's not always just the people that you think. It may be that next door neighbor. It may be that woman who had, you know, lived in Wyndham, has a big beautiful house, or can be the husband as well. One spouse walks out, leaves them. They've been the caretaker, and they've got 3 children. They've always been the caretaker of those children. So they were at home. They haven't worked. They don't have a work history. And let me tell you, in this economy, getting a job if you're unemployed is near impossible, even if you have been employed. And so you can't always tell who it is. So it's, you know, the stereotype of who is hungry has changed very dramatically. It's not the guy that stands there on 64 where I used to get off on the boulevard to go to the food bank who holds that sign up, you know, need food or whatever, and I used to love to stop and say, food bank's right around the corner, you know, and they'd go, get out of here, lady. You know. That's an income. So, you know, what worries me is that's what people judge by who needs that. So it's not always who you think it is. And I would love for you to meet some of those beautiful children that we fed in our area through our many programs that we provide, who were bright. I mean, you know, my kids, I was a fanatic about, you know, because I went to work after they went to school. And so I was a very guilt-ridden working mother. And so I made sure that their lunches were packed. They had a hot breakfast, which annoyed them no end. You know, couldn't wait for the weekend to go visit friends so they could have cold cereal. You know, they had a dinner on the table. You know, I see these kids who get much better grades. And I don't understand, because they had all the love and care and nurturing that you're supposed to have. So there are just a lot of very bright people out here. We're kind of, you know, throwing to the wayside because of that. Well, who's hungry in Richmond? I brought a map, and you know, just to not kill trees. I'm just going to pass it around. I can get other copies of it. But this is a map that the U.S. Department of Agriculture sent out. And it talks about where are the hungry in Virginia. And I've got to say, I've been working with hungry people probably my whole career, because I started out on the eastern shore of Virginia. The dark spots seem to follow me, because that's one of the darkest on this map. I grew up in, you know, in Accomack and Northampton, well, in Accomack County, but I served as director of an area agency on aging and a community action program. So I did feeding programs. There seems to be food on the brain or something, because it seems to have followed me, and I started a food bank there. But this is a map that shows where the poorest people, the most hungry or hunger insecure, a phrase we use, are. And interestingly enough, I was shocked, because I'm thinking I knew it was going to be the Eastern Shore. I grew up there and I still go back there. I thought it was going to be Appalachia. I mean, please, they do a great job of promoting their issues, and they have many, many, many. But what, to my shock and dismay, since the FeedMore serves 31 counties and 5 cities, and we have this whole area that goes through here, from the northern neck down through Southside Virginia, another hot spot of wealth, down to the North Carolina border. So I'm going to pass this around so you can kind of see where it is. But I was shocked to see that Southside Virginia, but of course, the city of Richmond, Petersburg, those did not surprise me, because as Harold Fitcher said when he was here talking about communities and schools, we have a higher degree of poverty and hunger insecurity in the city of Richmond and Petersburg and areas like that than Washington, D.C. Not something we want to strive to be really good at. So here's the map. The other thing I'm going to talk about, what does hunger insecure really mean? We're not talking about that total malnourishment that I was talking about earlier that you're going to see when you see, as I say, in third world countries. We're talking about something that's very, very subtle. You know, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is very good about telling us what we're supposed to eat. And they kind of break it down in, you know, 3 meals a day, 1/3 RDA at each of them. And for ease of explaining, in children 0 to 5, the first third of nutrients that go into their body, that goes to help develop their organ systems, you know, their heart, their lungs, their kidneys, that sort. If they get the second third of those nutrients, it goes to develop height and weight and that bone structure. And it's only if they get that 1/3 RDA that you have cognitive development. Now, I'm telling you, if you're not getting that food and you're not able to develop that cognitive development, which is what enables you to study and learn and read, then we start right there. And scientific studies have shown that if you are hungry as a child and you don't get the proper nutrients, your body doesn't develop, you then have all kinds of very expensive health issues. And the priority, what's going to probably happen is that when you get to be older, that pattern is going to continue. And so again, those health issues are going to become very dramatic. So it is really critical. It's kind of like that old saying, you can pay now or you can pay later. The cost now is very small, and we're very fortunate that we have programs called like WIC, Women's, Infants, and Children's Program. And that's a program where mothers can, if they're pregnant, while they're pregnant into that, 5 years old, can go and get some help to make sure they have milk and other products to be able to feed. And that's why programs like, what we call it now, SNAP, that's a euphemistic word for food stamps. And we talk, and why those kinds of programs are so important, because you need that extra support to be able to feed your family. Now, Richmond has done a lot of studies, and again, there was a map that in January of 19th, and I saved this, that talked about where is poverty in the city of Richmond, and I will pass this around because this was done by third-party experts. We pay a lot of money to do a lot of studies to find out what's wrong. I would have loved to have been on this committee, because some people like Sally Graham and some others of us, who do this on a routine, could have probably told them who was in poverty without having to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to do a study. Now there's a plan, and the joy will be what happens with the plan to see what's happened. But again, this talks about, and when Harold Fitcher, those of you who heard Harold talk about communities and schools, this is the children. They're in Gilpin Court, Creighton Court, Dove Court. We are so fortunate in this area that, again, we have more subsidized housing, more low-income subsidized housing than anywhere south of New York City. So that's part of the issue with the city of Richmond, is it's all kind of in one spot. And so some of us have been trying to do some programs to do deeper dives, to kind of focus more funds to go deeper. As Harold talked, we have 5 generations of poverty. Now, the children that grow up in this area, and again, I'll pass that map around, the children that grow up in that area, as Harold said, think they're probably only going to live to be probably 21 years old anyway. You know, they go to school, they haven't had the proper nutrients to develop their mind and body, so their brains aren't functioning. They're living in subsidized housing where people are shooting at night. So as many of them tell me, you sleep in the bathtub because that's a safe place. The bullets are going to whiz through and you're probably not going to get hit. And so you don't get a good night's sleep. You go in, there's not much there to eat. Fortunately, we have programs, hopefully will continue, to do subsidized breakfast and lunch. That's a huge, important program. Many children only get, if they get there in time in the morning, because tardiness is rampant because you haven't slept well. You know, if mom or dad is lucky enough to work, or grandmother, whoever is your legal guardian, has a job, they're probably going to be working shift work, so they're going to get the less desirable because they're not going to be the folks that have the highest education, because if you're doing well, you don't continue to live in Gilpin Court, Creighton Court, Dove Court. But it's not just there. It's also very hidden in places like Goochland, and it's you know, rampant throughout our rural counties. Part of it is, you know, you'll hear a phrase used we always like to use phrases to make things sound better. They're what we call food deserts. And those are places where there is not access to food. So if you go to Gilpin Court or Creighton Court or Dove Court or Fairfield Court, one thing you'll notice is there are no beautiful parks so that people can get exercise, because that's really important to get good exercise. There is not a grocery store. There's no beautiful brand new Kroger or Food Lion or, you know, Fresh Market or Whole Foods. There are none of those. Generally, there is a very small bodega on the corner or some sort of and that sells things that are very high carbohydrate, you know, that are burned very quickly, because those kinds of foods, soda, chips, you know, cookies, things like that, are very filling. They're cheaper, and the bad news is they burn very quickly, and so then you want to crave more. And so, you know, these are not good things. So not having a grocery store, one of the things we've worked for years was trying to get somebody interested. But because of the high crime, no one in their right mind who is any kind of a good capitalist is going to be dumb enough to put a grocery store in an area like that, because there isn't there isn't the money there to bring it in to make it reliable. Plus, you can imagine what the insurance would be. Can you imagine the security you would have to be? So it's such a double-edged sword not to be able to do it. So we have a tremendous problem. The challenge was with originally the Central Virginia Food Bank and later becoming FeedMore when we merged with Meals on Wheels. Well, you know, what are we going to do about that? And so, you know, we decided that something had to be done. In the city of Richmond, and I'm not Metro Richmond, city of Richmond, there are 14,000 children who are hunger insecure. That is, they don't know where that next meal is coming from. Of those, 11,000 are not only hunger insecure, but they are also very high risk. They're the people Harold Fitcher from Communities and Schools was talking about. And so, you know, if you've got this degree of a problem, you could kind of, there's days when you feel like kind of putting your head in the sand and just saying, oh, the heck with it. But you got to, you know, eat the elephant one bite at a time. So it's a complex issue. It's not just about food. It's not just about hunger. It's about transportation. It's about jobs. It's about decent housing. It's about safe, affordable daycare. It's a very complex problem. But all we could do at FeedMore was deal with what are the issues around food. What can we do to make it more accessible, safer, healthier? Because what we're seeing is In the children, it used to be called adult onset diabetes. Now, they're seeing it in children in school. Very young children, particularly in areas of schools that are in Gilpin Court, Creighton Court, Dove Court, areas like that, and many rural as well. So we said, well, you know, one of the things we've got to do is we've got to figure out how to grab our arms around this. So we said, let's break the groups into 3. Let's do programs for children, very specific for children. Let's do some for families, and let's do some for senior citizens. So when we merged, we had Meals on Wheels, which is a wonderful program. It's much more, and you know, some of our wonderful volunteers are here in the audience. It's much more than taking the food. It's that hug that the volunteer gives that person, because you're the only person they see. So it's a social check to make sure they're alive and well and not lying on the floor having fallen or had a stroke or something like that. So Meals on Wheels is a wonderful program, and we are blessed to have so many volunteers who help with that program, because that's a very hands-on, one-on-one program where you're very intimate with the person. You have contact with the person, you know, to do that. So we said, okay, that takes care of that. For families, we have over 500 agencies throughout the area. Sally Graham has a food pantry in the Goochland Fellowship and provides some of the food. So that's an example of the kind of thing. Freedom House used to be one of ours, but will go away this week. So it's a wide variety. It's primarily faith-based pantries, and we are very diverse. We have Christian, Muslim, Jewish, different kinds of pantries, and some non-denominational. So that kind of takes care of the families. We take the food out to the pantry because the people in Goochland know where the Goochland Fellowship is. They're not going to come all the way in to FeedMore. They don't have transportation, or it's very limited. They got to pay somebody, so they do that. And then for the children's programs we had a program called Kids Cafes, and that's where the children come out of school. They go to a place very close to the school, because where things happen for all children of all socioeconomics, young boys and girls, that's when they leave from school till they get home. Oftentimes we can be distracted by other things, and particularly if you live in a low-income area, it's much more to get in trouble doing. So anyhow, we want to have the sites very close, either in the school or nearby. So it could be the Y. Many of them are in the Y. Many of them, Salvation Army provides them. Lots of some faith-based communities. So they're right near the school. So the children come right out, go there, and they have tutoring, they have mentoring, they have a decent meal. So they're going to get, because otherwise if they're going to school, they're going to get breakfast. If they get there in time, they're going to get that school lunch. Now, I don't know how the lunches were when you went to school, or how for your children and your grandchildren, but I don't know that I'd want to go 24 hours on a school lunch, personally. I mean, but then I kind of like to eat. So we provide a dinner meal. It goes there, it's warmed up at the site, and we try to make it healthy and nutritious. One of the things we did was, just over 5 years ago, we built what we called our community kitchen, and it's a high production kitchen. Great opportunity to volunteer. People really love to volunteer there. You get to help prepare the food. Some people prepare it, some people package it. We have cooks to do the cooking, but the prep work, you know, if you're doing 3,000 to 5,000 meals a day from scratch, that's a lot of carrots and onions and celery and cabbage and all of those good things. So we really work hard to raise money to be able to provide fresh fruits and vegetables. In many cases, when we have delivered fresh fruits and vegetables to the children, they have not a clue what they are. They have not seen them. They may have had them in a can, but they've not had access to fresh ones. And so, you know, over the years, changing their palate has been a real challenge, to the fact that now the children request to have salads, and so they have chef salad about once a week. But I'm going to tell you, that was about a 5-year investment of a lot of good healthy food going into the trash can. They're kind of no different than my children and grandchildren, you know, about being picky about what they eat and what touches what. We also do a program called the Backpack. One of the things we found, I have a very dear friend, Steve Baird, who used to be the owner of Capital Pontiac and what is it, GM and all those sold cars out on Laburnum. And he said to me one day at a board meeting, well, Faye, if they're hungry during the week, aren't they hungry on the weekend? And I went, yeah, but we can barely feed them during the week, Steve. And so he was always very generous in making sure that we had enough funds to be sure before he retired and moved to Florida. And so that's why we built the kitchen, to be able to do this, to do the meals, but then we have to do the backpack meals. And those are meals where we provide 3 meals for 2 days a week, Saturday and Sunday, and there are several snacks. Now, there are children, I mean, Harold Fitcher gave a great intro. He talked about the child who was crying because they were next, because if everybody showed up that day to get their backpack, they weren't going to get one. So these meals are very important. A lesson we learned very early on was we sent the food out and we thought, oh, the kids will be so excited in a backpack. We put it in a plastic bag you can't see through. It goes in their own backpack, so there's no stigma to it. Not that they're embarrassed, they're just so glad to get it. And, you know, some of the food came back and we couldn't understand why. Well, it had to be opened with a can opener. And some of our kids who are latchkey are 4 or 5 years old, or who are living in a hotel, or are living under a bridge, or living in the family car, they don't have access to a can opener. So we had to go to more expensive cans that are pop top. So that we do those. Those cost almost $10 a piece. It's a very, very expensive program. But you know, the good news of that has been that by doing that program with the communities and schools, they tell us who is in the greatest need, because we don't know. They tell us who's in the greatest need, the children that they observe, the teacher, the counselor, who is the most hungry. We send them home with those children. And the teachers are telling us that they see such a marked difference in that child's behavior. You know, it's just different. If you're hungry, you're struggling, you know, you can't do it. So those are some of the, we also do a healthy snack for areas. There's some areas that don't have a building that meets code. You've got to meet fire code, you got to meet, and of course you'd want to do all of that. So they don't do it. In the summer, we do a program called Summer Feeding, because when the children aren't in school, there's no free breakfast, there's no free lunch. So all of a sudden, mom and dad have this new expense to do. So anyway, we do 2 meals a day, you know, in the summertime. So let me kind of conclude with, well, what can you do? Well, we always need volunteers, and I put some things over here. There is an annual report. There's a book if you have a corporation that talks about ways different people can help. There's an annual report, and there's a card on being a volunteer. We need volunteers to help sort the food. We need volunteers to help pack the backpacks. Can you imagine? We do 2,000 every week, so they all have to be, you know, there's quality control involved in making sure the right foods are in there. We need people to help to cut up all those carrots and celery. We need all those people to pack, you know, the 1,000 meals a day for Meals on Wheels customers, and they have to be very carefully done because everyone is individually packed for a specific person, because we have 17 special diets, and so you can't confuse Phoebe's meal with somebody else's meal, because she might have an allergy to peanuts, and last thing we have more than enough customers, but we don't want to get rid of them that way. You can be an advocate, you know, read about what your government is doing. And I know these are hard times and decisions have to be made, but you need to be a good advocate. You need to read about what is the impact. It just sounds so neat to just save a couple of $1 billion getting rid of food stamps or WIC or something like that. But what is the impact? I can tell you the impact is going to come back and get you when you have to pay for the health care for someone who is going to be on dialysis when they're late 20s because of the severe problems of diabetes because they didn't eat right. They didn't get the proper nutrients that didn't develop. So being a good advocate, write to your congressman, talk to them, find out what's going on and how you can do that. Serve on city council, serve on your local government. You know, have a voice, speak out. And you can always, we always say, donate your time, your talent, your treasure. You know, these programs don't happen. We had to raise, and one of the things that I feel so much taller now is not having to raise $8 million a year. Makes you feel a lot taller. You don't have to carry all, you know. It's hard. People don't realize, for example, FeedMore is a $30 million program. All that food has to be donated from somewhere. You know, it's important. So if you're in a grocery store and you see somebody throwing something away that's inappropriate, speak to them, call FeedMore and tell them about it. We'll go make a call. Fortunately, most of the grocery stores here in our area are very generous. So there are lots of things that you can do. It's a very complex subject. It can't be covered in 20 minutes because it does involve transportation to getting to healthy, nutritious food. It's about learning and education on, you know, your diet. It's about how to cook foods that are reasonable, you can afford. It's such a complex problem, and getting people educated so we don't have a 6th generation of poverty. So that's a little bit. Questions you might have, since I've been yakking at you so long. Yes?
How do you distribute the meals to the children in the summertime?
In the summertime, well, we pay drivers because a lot of the areas that we have to go into, they're very time sensitive. So if you get caught on the railroad track and you're there too long, the food has a very narrow window of health safety. And so they have to be in special heaters, and they are delivered, to the children, and then they are reheated by the site where they're being served. So
like in Gilpin Court, they go to they take the food from your
yes.
preparation place to another place, and the children.
Yes, like something like
Friend Center,
the Y or something like that. Absolutely,
so
yes.
The children, what about children who have a hard time getting there? I mean,
well, that's why we always try to have the sites within walking distance of the school. Now, that being said, we're only doing about 3,000 meals after school. We do about 7,000 meals in the summer, but that's breakfast and lunch. So that tells you, and that was the hard part. That was the 3 o'clock wake up for me. You know, I know there are 11,000 kids that needed that backpack in the city of Richmond. And we were doing 2,000, and that included Henrico and Chesterfield and Petersburg. And so, you know, whenever I saw Harold Fitcher coming, it was always like, go away. I don't want to see you because you're going to tell me something I don't want to hear. And, you know. Go ahead.
How do you track the success ratio of the program? Again, it's with our partners. So we anticipate, and you're going to hear from somebody coming that Tracy's invited to talk about the why. And that would be a good question. We do things like do evaluations. We do follow-ups with the groups. They do studies themselves to watch. You know, you track with communities and schools. They have all kinds of wonderful numbers. They can show you how the child was doing in school before we started the meal, how they're doing after. So each program does it a little bit differently, you know. And in many cases, the people that come to get help to get the bag of groceries, it's usually a couple of months at the max, you know. Both people are working. One loses their job. You know, they teeter along for a while, use up their savings, and then they have to come get help. And then, you know, then they get a job and they go off. So for those folks, it is. With senior citizens, they're on a very fixed income. 2 years in a row, they didn't get an increase. And just by the way, so you can understand the importance of thinking about food stamps, because you hear so many horror stories. If you're a senior citizen and you get food stamps, I'm so excited. After about 6 years of advocating really hard, we got it for one person up from $11 to $15 a month. I can remember doing a hunger study. We do every 4 years. We go out and we do go to 100 agencies, and we ask the people who receive the food, a series of this
outrageous number of questions. And I remember I was down in Northern Neck, and I went up to this nice gentleman, and I got to that question, and I said, "Sir, some of these questions are really stupid, I know, but I have to ask them in the order in which they are given. This is a scientific study." And so I got to the one, and I said, "Sir, do you give food stamps?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "How long do your food stamps last? 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks?" And he said, "Lady, how stupid are you? $11, really?" So, you know, it is a challenge. It's a big issue, and you know, as I say, it can't be resolved in 20 minutes. But you know, it's all a part of all of this outreach that you're hearing. You've heard about the importance of communities and schools. We've got to get them educated. You got to feed them so they can get educated. You got to provide transportation. So if there is a job, they can get a job. You know, you got to have safety. You got to have housing where the children can go out and play, because we see a lot of obesity, but it's because of a factor that maybe at another time we can talk about, the feast and famine. You know, if you do get food stamps, you get them. You eat like crazy for 2 weeks, and then for 2 weeks, there isn't any. And you go in this panic mode. It's not, you know, it's not a healthy way. And then there's a whole nother topic we can talk about another time about all of us involved, and really the foods, the high fructose, the corn syrup and things that we're all being fed, which make us sick, so that then we can, you know, take more medications to make somebody better off. So anyhow, then, and we really need to get back. We're so blessed to live in Goochland, where we have access to a wonderful farmers market, where if you can afford it, there's, you know, healthy fruits and vegetables, and eat close to the ground. So there's just, it's an exciting world. There's lots you can do. Serve on a committee, serve on a board, get out there and volunteer. You know, make a difference. That's what, you know, we're supposed to see the face of Jesus in everybody we meet. And some are a little more challenged, at least for me, than others. But not many of them were poor people, I can tell you. You know, they look just like you and me. They have the same problems that we each have. And as I used to explain to my son, I took him one time, we were on our way to what is it, the one, Busch Gardens. And when they were in middle school, they had a friend visiting, and I said, "I've got to stop off and speak. I promised somebody I would speak at a congressional hearing." And so they're sitting there. And a woman got up and gave her entire budget. And she talked about her food stamps. So we got in the car, and my son said, "Mom, my shirt cost as much as she spent for a week on her groceries for a family of 4. I said, "Yeah." So it's that learning, studying, finding out. Don't make assumptions. You know, don't believe the stereotypes. So anyway,
Do they still have a pickup here every week, or is that something that just happens to do